Welcome to a candidate forum for Sacramento City Council District 4. The candidates in alpha order are Phil Pluckybaum and Katie Valenzuela. This forum is sponsored by the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County and the Sacramento Metro Cable Television Commission. I'm Paula Lee, a member of the League of Women Voters of Sacramento County, and I'll moderate the forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization of women and men. We work at all levels of government to encourage the informed and the active participation in government. The League does not support or oppose political candidates or parties. However, we are a political organization, and we do, after careful study, take positions on ballot measures and legislation. So if you're interested in public policy, or you just want to support our volunteer work, we invite you to join us. The format for this forum will be as follows. These candidates will have 2 to 3 minutes for an opening statement. They'll have 1.5 minutes to answer the questions in rotating order, and then they'll have 1 minute for a closing statement. The lead timer is in the front row, and she will give you candidates the 30-second sign when you have 30 seconds left, and the stop sign. So we begin with opening remarks from Phil Pluckybaum. Phil?
Good morning, and first thank you to the League for hosting this forum, and thank you to the county for opening their chambers and Metro Cable for hosting this broadcast. My name is Phil Pluckybaum. I'm a candidate for Sacramento City Council District 4. I've lived in Sacramento for more than 20 years. Sacramento's given a lot to me, and in that time, I went to Sacramento State. I met my wife here, I raised my family here, and this is an opportunity for me to give back, to honor some of the lifelong friendships and people that have given so much to me. I want to figure out how to make Sacramento a place that we can all continue to embrace and support and want to invest in. In that time, I was president of the River Park Neighborhood Association. I served as planning commissioner for more than 8 years, and I served on the chair of the board to rebuild McKinley Playground after the fire burned that down about a decade ago. I volunteered on countless tree plantings and parks cleanups and all the other events that make our community strong and rich. And now I'm asking you to support me for Sacramento City Council so that I can continue that service. What I'd like to do is make sure that this is not just a destination city, but a destination of choice, a place that people want to continue to be and invest, a place that people raise their families and that their children come back and raise their families again for generations to come. So I look forward to this discussion and an opportunity for us to all get to know each other a little better today. Thank you.
Thank you. Katie Valenzuela?
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Katie Valenzuela, and I've had the honor of representing District 4 since 2020. And my path to office, before that, I moved to Midtown in 2009 when I was a graduate student at UC Davis, and just absolutely fell in love with this community. I knew this was going to be my home of choice. A few years later, I left Midtown briefly to buy a house in Oak Park. I had just gotten married, and my husband and I were doing what all newlyweds do and buying a house. But shortly after buying that house, the situation in my marriage became pretty unsafe, and it became pretty obvious that I was going to need to leave pretty quickly. So I took all of my savings. I had a decent job, thankfully, got all of my family support around me, and I decided to come back to Midtown. And I have to say that I was shocked at what I saw. Apartments that I had rented just a couple years prior were almost double in price. There were encampments already starting to proliferate across my neighborhood and across the central city, and I didn't understand what happened. And by the time I found an apartment I could afford, it took every single dollar I had in my savings account to afford the last month's rent and to move. So when I finally settled and was safe, I wanted to understand what was going on, and that was an unacceptable shift. It was a pretty quick shift, and I didn't understand. And I was looking at housing prices that just kept going up. More and more people that I knew who were starting to fall through the cracks and starting to double and triple up in apartments. And I was looking at City Hall and realizing that the decisions they were making were not only not making the problem better, but in some ways they were actually making the problem worse. So I decided to run, not because it was my lifelong ambition to run, but because I felt it was so important to get somebody in this seat who was going to prioritize housing and real solutions. And right after I got elected, 3 weeks later, the pandemic hit. And all of those decisions that had been made, all of that action and inaction just came crashing down on our doorstep. And we started to see encampments pop up everywhere. Hundreds and thousands of people starting to lose their jobs, lose their housing, and we were in complete triage mode. But I am proud of the work that we've gotten done in these last 3 years. We definitely have way more work to do, but I'm confident that if we stay on the path that we are currently on, that we can see the real change that we've been waiting to see in Sacramento. So I look forward to talking more about those things today.
Thank you. Well, no surprise, candidates, we have received a number of questions on homelessness and housing, and it reflects the residents' mounting concern and frustration. So the first question, we began with Phil Pluckybaum. The number of unhoused individuals continues to skyrocket. We know this requires multifaceted and budget-driven solutions at all levels of government. So what are your short and long-term solutions?
Sure, thank you for the question. It's important, I think, that we're here today in the county chambers. So much about what needs to happen for people experiencing homelessness is a partnership between the city and the county. Long-term, you'll hear every candidate talk about permanent supportive affordable housing with wraparound services. That's always the goal. That's gold standard, and it's always in the future, and it's always very expensive. So today, what we can do immediately for the people that are unhoused on our streets is open up safe ground campgrounds with deliberate speed, places with security, storage, showers and toilets, basic amenities, things that we can deploy quickly while we're helping folks triage out of those situations into better permanent supportive affordable housing.
Katie Valenzuela?
Yeah, the numbers in our community countywide started going up in 2015. That's when we started to realize that there was a problem. And in 2017, our numbers went up by a third. In 2019, it went up by another 50% until we got to 2022 when we saw this startling doubling in numbers. And so we know that there's a trajectory that we were on that we need to change if we're going to achieve long-term solutions. I'm proud to have been the first council member to ever start a safe camping area in my district. We started 3 different sites. They were incredibly successful. We got hundreds of people off the streets, and so definitely in the short term, providing people places to use the restroom, to sleep safely at night, to shower, and to start building relationships with case management is the immediate thing we can do. And we're seeing that be successful with the new Roseville Road site that we just opened. But long term, it is so much about affordable housing, and not just the projects we subsidize, but also bringing back protections for the housing we have now. That's stronger tenant protections, that's the opportunity to purchase housing you might live in that might go up for sale, and that's requirements for-profit developers to build a certain number of affordable units into their market rate projects. We need all of those solutions, plus a long-term funding source, which I propose come from a vacancy tax, so that we can help triage those emergency needs to keep more people housed and to get more people off of our street.
Okay, Katie Valenzuela, 2 city council members have asked the city to explore a citywide daytime ban on homeless encampments. Do you support this idea? Why or why not?
I do not support a citywide ban on camping simply because it does absolutely nothing to solve the problem. We are already in a situation where all the city can do in most cases is ask people to move if they're in a non-compliant location. And that movement, sometimes it's a block away, sometimes it's a few blocks away, but I can tell you as someone representing the entire central city today before redistricting, that it takes a matter of hours or days before we see that encampment pop up someplace else. So continuing that carousel of moving people around, and carousel is the word that some city staff use, it's not my word, of just moving people around is a waste of our resources. It's harmful to the folks that are experiencing that, and all of that time and energy would be much better spent at opening the safe grounds. I am not going to say that there are not exceptions to that rule though. When criminal activity is happening, when there's complete blockage of sidewalk, obviously there are going to be those sort of urgent situations that require us to act more quickly, but we need to put our energy into the upstream solutions we know work, which is giving people a safe place to go.
Phil Pluckybaum?
And I don't support the daytime camping ban, but for very different reasons. All the things that we've done over the past few years, the sidewalk ordinance, the critical infrastructure ordinance, these are, we're trying to treat residue problems, symptoms of a larger problem. We have 10,000 people on our streets that need housing, and trying to push them around from place to place isn't helping anyone. We already have a camping ban. All we need to do is establish enough shelter so that under Boise we have the ability to enforce our existing laws and codes. We don't need to create a whole bunch of new, half measures that won't actually achieve a solution.
And Phil, what is your top goal for affordable housing if elected?
45,000 units immediately. We need to build, for the state of California, 45,000 units. We are behind just treading water with population growth. We have to catch up somehow. This is a West Coast problem, not unique to Sacramento, but we in Sacramento in particular have been falling behind so far, so fast. 75,000 units cumulatively in the region. 45,000 of those units should be in our city. We have not built over the past decade. That is a key contributing factor to housing and affordability in our region. So we need to build fast, smart, defensible, sustainable, environmentally responsible housing, but fast.
Katie Valenzuela.
Yes, I don't disagree that we need to build more housing, but just over 16,000 of those units need to be available for low-income people. This is our growing population of folks on the street, seniors, people with disabilities, people who are never going to be able to afford a market rate unit. So I have proposed a suite of measures that work together that I've referenced before: stronger tenant protections, opportunity to purchase, so we're moving more properties into community ownership and not losing bidding wars to investment companies whose owners don't even live here, and that we're actually finding a sustainable funding source to help subsidize the units that we need to build. It's both about making it easier to build, but about making sure the right units are being built. So we have proposed a vacancy tax, which would cover vacant parcels and vacant mixed-use buildings that could generate potentially $22 million a year. That is more than 10 times what we currently get in our Affordable Housing Trust Fund every year, and would enable us to significantly ramp up the development of the subsidized affordable housing we need, which will alleviate the pressure on the market rate units and simultaneously building on our success as a pro-housing city to keep taking steps to make it easier to build units of all types.
You'll notice that some of these questions overlap. So you may have answered some of this with your last question, but I want to give the opportunity to both candidates. So the question is, simply building more won't necessarily address affordable concerns. What steps should the city be taking in the future to ensure affordability needs will be met?
Can I start that one?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, as I just said, we've put forward a series of policy measures. The one that I didn't mention in the last question is inclusionary zoning, which ensures a certain percentage of market rate developments are affordable. Not necessarily the super subsidized affordable, but we're talking like working people affordable, the firefighters, the teachers, the folks who simply can't compete when we're building units downtown that are leasing for $3,000 a month. And that's forgetting if you have a child or multiple people in your households and can't live in a studio or one bedroom. Those units can sometimes go as high as $4,000 or $5,000 a month. So in addition to the policies I previously mentioned, I believe inclusionary is really important. And I've seen performance from developers as recently as last week that show me it's possible. So we just need to join the dozens of other cities across the state to implement that measure as well.
Phil Pluckymon.
On the private sector side, we've seen what policies like rent control and inclusionary zoning do in other communities. They've suppressed investment and caused further disenfranchisement in communities. And on the public sector side here locally, we've seen what our affordable housing developers are able to accomplish when the average price per housing for the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency is double, sometimes triple what private sector parties are able to accomplish. There's something deeply unaffordable about that affordable housing component. So I think the board members of SHRA, the city and the county need to work hard with those leaders to figure out how to reduce those costs so that we can actually produce the kind of housing that people deserve for that public investment.
Phil, I'm going to ask the question about inclusionary housing. Not everyone may know what it is. This question for you, for both of you. Sacramento does not have an inclusionary housing policy, one that requires new developments to include a portion of their apartments and homes to be affordable to lower income residents. How will you approach an inclusionary policy, and will you support one that requires mixed income developments?
So the city of Sacramento, developers pay into a fee program. Instead of, let's say you have a project that's 100 units, 10 of those units being deed restricted affordable and the other 90 paying the difference to cover that cost, the developers will just pay a fee into a larger program that those fees largely go to SHRA. SHRA then goes out and does that affordable housing development. The reason that inclusionary zoning is problematic is because it's inequitable. It asks for newcomers, people that are coming into those new projects, to cover the cost of affordable housing for our region. The challenge that we have is how to produce a fund that could support housing development regionally, and we can't do that until we can bring development costs at SHRA down to something like competitive. Otherwise, asking the voters to support some other additional fund or additional fees isn't gonna fly.
Katie Valenzuela?
I absolutely support inclusionary and mixed income housing. The fee that my opponent just referenced was adopted in 2016, and at that time it was 1/3 of what SHRA said they needed to be able to build the units in lieu of those developers building them themselves. And I think it's interesting to characterize this policy as inequitable when the very premise of inclusionary is to allow people who can't afford market rate units to have access to the same amenities, the same communities that people who can't afford market rate can get. This is how we confront things like the history of redlining and segregation, is by ensuring that we're integrating all incomes into future market rate developments so that our communities can be integrated, so that we can all benefit from living near and with each other and all of the things that come with that. To the cost of building affordable units, there's a fundamental misunderstanding about how you finance affordable housing. Not only are you building in the rent subsidy for the next 50 years, the repairs, the services, the maintenance, all of that stuff that you need to keep that building going for the next 50 years. We are sending affordable developers through a complete rigmarole to get financing, in large part because we were failing to put forward sufficient local funding so that they can pull down more of those state and federal resources. So if we're looking for a solution to how to drive those costs down, it is having that significant money, which comes from either charging developers a fair price or by generating revenue through something like a vacancy tax.
Katie, the city and county of Sacramento have opened or plan to open over the next year hundreds of new emergency homeless shelter spaces, either at safe parking lots or at tiny home communities. Is this the right strategy for addressing our unhoused crisis? Why or why not?
This current strategy is part of the right strategy because, as was mentioned before, we're in need of immediate triage. We can't wait for to leave somebody on the street while we build the housing and services that they need. We need something available as soon as possible. But part of my questioning of the strategy is that we are not planning for and investing in the sufficient affordable housing that we need to really unclog this pipeline. Our shelters and our streets right now are full of people with income, people who could sustain an apartment or a living situation with some case management successfully if that affordable housing option was available. And for every one person we're getting off the street, 3 more people are losing their housing, and research tells us that one of the overwhelming reasons that's happening is because of affordability concerns, either an ongoing gap of a few $100s a month that they couldn't sustain, or a one-time emergency that had they had access to a couple $1,000s, they would have been able to stay housed. So for me, the triage is where we're really focused right now. And when we adopted the Affordable Housing Trust Plan as part of the partnership agreement, I raised significant concerns that the number of units that we were committing to building was like 2,000, which when you look at 16,000 that we know we need today, isn't coming anywhere close to delivering on the actual solutions that will pull us out of this crisis.
Phil Pluckybon?
A decade ago, when Kevin Johnson was mayor, Oprah came to town, and it was this big national embarrassment that we had 1,000 people sleeping out on our streets, and that was a crisis in that time. Tonight we have 10,000 people sleeping out on our streets, and here we find ourselves in a position of every previous council and mayor having opposed the countenance of safe ground, safe camping sites, old style Hoover bills. Now we have one. it's the whole city. And what we need to do is organize those sites into places with showers and toilets and security storage, and then help start to triage them towards more permanent support of affordable housing. It is an interim step as we work towards the goal of having housing for everyone. But today, in 2024, I don't think we're going to be able to achieve housing for 10,000 people. So what we need to do is move deliberately to make that goal a reality as soon as possible.
And Phil, the City and County of Sacramento have a joint power agreement regarding Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency. How would you approach this partnership to better address affordable housing and homelessness?
Thank you for asking that question. I almost brought it up in the last answer. As a professional project manager, this is one of my favorite documents because what it does is establish roles and responsibilities of the two parties. The city is responsible for land use and enforcement. The county is responsible for all the public health, mental health services, the social safety net stuff that counties do. So this clarity, I think, is something that was lost a decade ago as the city moved progressively more and more into that county space and started doing that, homeless services and all the other things that are traditionally county functions. My goal is to work with the county. I have supported 4 of the 5 county supervisors in this race because they want someone to work collaboratively with them to achieve those common goals of providing for people, making sure that they get access to the healthcare and services that they need.
Katie Valenzuela?
So if I understand the question correctly, I don't think you were talking about the partnership agreement, you were talking about the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency, which has existed for years. And they do what they do very well, which is navigate complex government funding streams to output affordable housing projects. What they need and what they tell me consistently that they need is more local funding. This is a budget priority that should be a budget priority given how frequently we talk about homelessness, that we would be increasing the amount of money we give to SHRA, because in the pipeline, there are hundreds of projects that could be built or starting to be built if they had the funding that they needed to be able to acquire the land and start financing their projects. And so SHRA's biggest obstacle, I would say, has been the fact that they've been dealing with maybe a small sliver of the funding that they could actually be using to make projects happen. And with those projects happening, again, we see the housing we need, we prevent people from falling to the streets, and we get the people off of the streets who are ready for that step, but are languishing in our shelters because there are no options available for them.
And Katie Valenzuela, Prop 1 is a statewide proposition that will be on the ballot, but it will impact Sacramento. So the question is, do you support statewide Proposition 1, the mental health care and addiction treatment reform in bond? Why or why not?
I will admit that I've been a little preoccupied with my own campaign to have done the research on this. I understand the intention is to free up more money so we can house people in addition to treating them for mental health, but I've had some serious concerns raised by community members, so I look forward to doing my research on that measure before I vote in March, and hope that others will do the same before they make that decision.
Phil Pluckybon?
I emphatically support Proposition 1. It is the needed missing ingredient in our response to people experiencing homelessness. As the council member stated earlier, there is a large population of people that have jobs, that are working, that are unable to afford housing or have barriers to access for housing through bad credit or criminal history or some other impediment to fleeing abuse. That population of folks are more ready, more able to be reached. On the other end of the spectrum, you have folks that are doing really bad stuff, human trafficking, drug trafficking. We have whole programs and systems through the criminal justice system for them. In the middle, there's a very visible population of people that we see walking through our streets, lost. People experiencing mental illness, drug and alcohol addiction, and the care courts, unfortunately, won't be a solution for all those folks. Some folks are going to need involuntary mental health treatment. We have that solution decades past. We disbanded it for obvious abuses. I am confident that this governor will bring forward a version of that now that will satisfy the needs of the ACLU and others.
Well, moving on to a different topic now. Phil, policing policies and practices have been at the forefront of public discussion and review in recent years. How do you define public safety and what may need to change, if anything, to build trust that law enforcement will serve all communities more equitably?
I define public safety very simply. It's clean and safe streets. It's a perceived and real encounter with the public in their public environments that they feel, that people feel safe and are statistically actually safe. To achieve that, we need to do a few things. One, we need to create an environment that we can attract and retain qualified law enforcement officers. Right now, the city has 100 funded vacant positions in its police department where we're unable to attract and retain qualified candidates. And we need those candidates that we do have, the law enforcement officers that are serving the city today, to be rested and well-trained and able to show up with the right orientation to the work so that everyone can leave those encounters safely. One of the best metrics for a good outcome is that everyone leaves unharmed. And wherever possible, we need to work to make sure that that's happening. There are going to be instances, and we've seen some very public ones, both here locally and nationally, of abuses. In those instances, we need to have robust accountability and transparency so that our public can maintain that trust with our law enforcement officers.
Katie Valenzuela?
I define public safety as not needing to rely on our emergency systems because you're able to have your needs met before an emergency arises. So that's beyond traditional fire and police response. This is about ensuring our young people have safe places to go after school, that there's affordable housing options for people who need to leave potentially violent situations, that there's mental health counseling and services available so that people don't reach a crisis point where they're hurting themselves or others. For me, public safety in the safest community is the one where calls to 911 go down. And that is my ultimate metric for if calls for service are going up, then something is wrong, regardless of how we've responded to that, regardless of the outcome. If people have reached a crisis point, then we are failing in our systems to do everything we can to prevent that from occurring. A great example are the investments that we made in community-based organizations that specialize in violence prevention. These are not law enforcement officers, these are community members who have lived experience, who went to those communities to interrupt violence, and we have seen our gun violence numbers go down as a result of their work. That is what safety means to me, and in terms of building trust, we need to confront the ongoing disproportionality in policing. Some of that you can do through training, some of that you need to do through investment in prevention measures so that those officers' presence is less necessary. Across the board, we have a long way to go in building trust, and I think that starts with having honest conversations about the perpetual systemic issues that still exist in our department as in many departments across the country.
Katie Valenzuela, do you see the need for civilian oversight and or review of law enforcement practices and policies? Why or why not?
I am absolutely supportive of civilian oversight of law enforcement. I've worked very closely with our Community Police Review Commission to identify and address their concerns. However, unfortunately, our council has only voted on one of their many recommendations since I came into office. It was a use of force standard increase that the mayor and I championed together. So we have proposed to the commission just a couple weeks ago a joint meeting between the commission and the council where it can be noticed to the public can attend, where we can really work out these questions in terms of scope and process and staffing so that they feel confident that they're able to do the job that they volunteered to do. Part of that is also training, which is something our departments and the commissioners themselves have asked for, that they can see more about the training that our officers and staff do receive so that they can better weigh in on recommendations for how to improve that to achieve better outcomes in our community. But I'm proud that my commissioner is now the chair of the police commission, and so we will be working very closely this year to implement these immediate meeting next steps as well as the recommendations moving forward.
Phil Pluckybaum?
Obviously, there's a need for civilian oversight of police use of force and all police policies and activities. We've all seen the body cameras. I think all we can do is continue to work with our law enforcement officers in the community to make sure we're all working together to make sure that all those activities are producing better outcomes for everyone.
And Phil, research has examined law enforcement stops and the use of force and misconduct and the racial disparities that exist in police interactions. What can the city of Sacramento do to address this?
This is a slightly more controversial answer. One of the things I'm actually enthusiastic about is automated speed enforcement. It's an opportunity for us to take the human out of the equation and have pretext traffic stops managed by automated camera and computer, making sure that we're not over policing any specific community with those cameras, moving them around adequately, and making sure that areas that are in need of that kind of speed enforcement and crosswalk and stop sign enforcement are getting that kind of robust attention.
Katie Valenzuela.
I am very troubled by the ongoing data, culminating most recently in a search and seizure audit that we completed that showed overwhelming disproportionality in how and who was being pulled over by law enforcement and who was being searched illegally. I think that, yes, obviously taking law enforcement out of certain circumstances, we are getting ready to introduce a pretext stop reform legislation that would actually take off certain non-safety related traffic stops from PD's bill. Like if one traffic light or one brake light is out and the other one is working and you're still visible, I don't want law enforcement to be pulling those people over, and we need to provide clear direction as a council as to when it is and is not appropriate. But that issue does not stop. A colleague of mine in another city introduced similar legislation. While people got pulled over less, there was still a racial disproportionality in who was being pulled over. So we have a deeper issue we need to confront in our law enforcement department. I asked the chief this question just a few weeks ago. Do you believe that there is a bias issue in our department, or do you believe that people of color commit crimes more frequently? Because if you don't believe that people of color commit crimes more frequently, which I do not, and the research shows does not what is occurring, then we have a potential bias issue that is going to rely on more than our current training allows, in addition to stronger accountability, which is why I've been very supportive of our Office of Public Safety and Accountability and building those relationships so people feel comfortable to complain, and that process when that complaint is filed is robust and meaningful.
Katie Valenzuela. Reducing gun violence calls for more than just registering firearms and trying to get guns off the streets. What strategies and/or policies have you or would you support to address gun violence prevention?
I mean, in my dream world, we get a lot of the guns off the streets, but until federal legislation comes on that matter, we've been champions of investing, as I mentioned before, in the community-based organizations who have documented proof that they are effective. We actually had no youth homicides in the city for 2 years after a spike that was troubling to everybody who was watching it, and that didn't happen by accident. It happened through investment in those community organizations who built trust, who figured out how to intervene and did so effectively. I think on a parallel track when it comes to investing in resources so that people, again, who have mental illness, people who are in domestic violence situations, young people who might be getting sucked into bad behaviors and policies, that we have resources for them so that we can actually intervene in that violence before it occurs is huge. I'm really excited about implementation of Measure L, our children's fund, and what that could mean for preventing violence. But overall, my priority has been investing in the people who have documented track records and getting this done, which are the community-based organizations operating in those neighborhoods where we are seeing gun violence occur.
Phil Plekebaum?
We are not going to eliminate guns in our community. We have established federal law. There are currently more guns in this country than people by a significant factor. So what we can do is make sure that this is an environment where law-abiding citizens are using those guns appropriately, and the folks that shouldn't have guns don't have access to them or are being prosecuted when they're found with them. One thing that we could do, pretty easily is, as guns are being registered, request a ballistic sample from each gun, not like having a card at home with your kid's fingerprints on it. The Department of Justice keeps a record of all registered firearms in the state of California. Having ballistics available for those firearms would go a long way to making sure that you can eliminate off the top all the legally registered firearms in a crime scene, and then narrow that down to specific targets if you're looking for the other perpetrator of a crime.
Phil Plekebaum, as a city council member, what would you do to reduce, changing topics, what would you do to reduce the carbon footprint of city activities significantly and quickly?
Oh yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. The city can do a few things. We have significant influence over our built environment through the general plan. We have influence over what our vehicle fleet does and the kind of purchasing that our city does. And then we have influence over our energy environment insofar as we're building in a specific way. Obviously SPUD's our energy provider, but let's work backwards. So, in terms of our built environment, there's a lot of things we can do to make sure that our building is more transit-oriented, more dense, buildings are efficient. A lot of that stuff's controlled at the state level by the building code. The city's already moving aggressively towards a carbon neutral vehicle fleet and making significant progress towards its purchasing. But the last area of opportunity is fuel redundancy with respect to natural gas. We're moving aggressively towards building electrification. That's a great goal. But at the end of that road, we're going to probably want to have some sort of fuel redundancy for heating. One of the goals for building electrification is to actually decommission the existing natural gas pipeline. To do that, we would need to move everyone in that system off of natural gas. My hope is that what we can do as an interim step is or continue to use those pipelines for hydrogen, retrofit existing fixtures and have fuel redundancy in a way that's green and clean.
Katie Valenzuela?
Yeah, I mentioned this before in a different forum, but hydrogen, most of the hydrogen in the state of California is produced from fossil fuels, and so it doesn't actually do much to clean. It just cleans at different spots, but the emissions still come earlier in the process. I will say that in addition to building communities that are walkable and beautiful and vibrant, maintaining our tree canopy, maintaining our green spaces, making sure that there's safe bike lanes and sidewalks for every community, one of the biggest sources of emissions locally is transportation. So we can be doing more to fight with our county colleagues for an investment in public transit. We have done that with students just by offering them free passes, which the city pays for out of our general fund. We saw an over 300% increase in young people using transit to get to their destinations. These are documented things that we can do to make transit more accessible, make it easier for people to choose lower emission ways to move around. Cleaning the fleets are really important, especially when it comes to our garbage trucks and things that we won't be able to replace with electric anytime soon. But we need everybody to have safe, walkable communities, which means investing in streetlights, urban tree canopy, all of those things so that people feel comfortable getting out of their cars, but hopefully having the robust public transit network that we desperately need so people have real alternatives rather than getting into their vehicle to go places.
Well, you have an opportunity to expound on that with this next question. Air quality improvement and greenhouse gas reductions are urgent regional goals. How will you manage competing interests of low-density housing development and increased highway roadway travel against mass transit utilization and active transportation like walk bike advocates?
Yeah, I mean, this was a big part of why I opposed a recent budget measure on the ballot that would have generated funding for transportation, because overwhelmingly that money was going to new freeways and new roads and not towards maintaining our existing bike walk infrastructure, fixing our potholes, and investing in our public transit. It was just wrong for climate. And so I took the stand against that measure and will continue to stand against similar measures so that we can have the funding we need to invest in those systems. I do think when it comes to the type of development, it is really tough because some people still really prefer those single family homes, but I'm really proud of the changes we've been making in the general plan to make it easier to build more density on more parcels, to make more of that by right. It won't cause anyone to demolish their single family home, but it will make it easier to add ADUs, make 3-plexes and 4-plexes. And when I first came into office, this was such a controversial topic, but we've done the work, we've had the conversations, I was on the Zoom calls with those neighborhoods until everyone's question was answered, and we've built the support for that zoning change from the ground up in the last 3 years. I'm really proud of our city for taking these steps on zoning. It was not a guarantee when I came into office, but I think we could be doing a lot more to incentivize the types of developments that we need through stronger investments in public transit and further zoning changes.
Phil?
We're not going to build 45,000 units through upzoning. It's just not feasible. We need to build significant residential developments quickly. To do that, some of that development is going to have to be greenfield development, and so we need to work with our regional planners, SACOG and others, to make sure that we are doing that kind of robust urban design and planning around transit-oriented corridors. to make sure that people have the kind of quality of life that they're seeking, and we can mitigate wherever possible impacts from vehicle-related emissions and others. As we're in this transition period, moving away from internal combustion engines towards hydrogen and electric cars and everything else, we're going to need to plan for that future. That hopefully at some point in the next 50 years, we have a less polluting vehicle fleet throughout our community and our state. Another area of opportunity would be leaf blowers. This is something that comes up perennially. Everyone enjoys the convenience of them, but it hates the noise and the emissions, both from air quality asthma and neighborhood particulate level and larger greenhouse gas air quality level are indefensible. So there are things that we could do, not like the SMUD lawnmower buyback program that we had decades ago. We could do something similar like that for leaf blowers today.
And Phil, how do we improve the livability among neighborhoods, particularly those that struggle with unemployment, lack of affordable housing, access to health care, and concentration of law enforcement engagement?
So my goal for Sacramento is for this to be, our city's motto for the longest time was to be the most livable city. I think a new version of that would be a destination of choice, a place that people want to continue to be. The first thing that we need to do is build a lot of housing. Building that housing takes jobs. There would be a tremendous amount of good paying jobs to support that housing construction. And that starts a virtuous cycle where we have people doing that work to build that housing that can also afford that housing, have access to that health care, have access to the food, entertainment, and quality of life that we're all seeking. My goal is for there to be tremendous investment in this region to build that housing, drive down that overall housing cost, and provide the kinds of middle class, good paying jobs that we all deserve.
Okay.
The neighborhoods where we're seeing those outcomes are the same neighborhoods that have historically seen those outcomes. They were built that way through redlining and segregation practices. We have communities that have infrastructure, access to opportunity, great green canopy, and we have communities that have not. And that have not persists until we are very intentional about our investment. Where are we investing? How are we investing? And how are we looking at everything through a lens of correcting this historic racial injustice that has happened, not just in Sacramento, but in communities across our country? And how do we be really thoughtful about bringing those communities into that decision-making process so that they can also advocate for their own interests and priorities? One way that we're doing that is through our environmental justice element in the general plan. I helped pass this law. I'm really proud of it. What it does is it targets those neighborhoods, it looks at those indicators, targets those neighborhoods, and forces the city to actually say how we're going to do that. How are we going to fix grocery store access? How are we going to improve bike and ped safety? How are we going to make sure the green canopy and park space is growing in those communities too? Our draft plan is fantastic. It still has a long way to go, but I'm really proud of the steps the city is taking to be really intentional about how we interrupt these cycles in the communities that are being left behind so that they can have access to all the same opportunities that we enjoy in other parts of town.
Katie Valenzuela, civic engagement is an integral part of the democratic process. When Sacramentans provide recommendations for city budgeting, how do you determine whether to support or reject a community recommendation on funding a budget area?
I'm a huge proponent of participatory budgeting. I think our budgets and how we manage the money that you give us through your tax dollars is one of our greatest responsibilities, and that the public deserves a voice in how that money has been spent. Before I came into office, we did such a survey. We caught over 3,500 Sacramento residents in that prioritization process. We did it in language. We met them where they were, and they told us very clearly what they want. They want investment in prevention. They want access to opportunity. They're concerned with public safety, but they don't see the solution through enforcement. They see the solution through being really strategic about building the resources they need through investment. So I think for us this cycle, we're going to finally implement this. This is something I've been really pushing for, and we're finally doing it. But we're going to have virtual community forums. We're going to have surveys. We're going to really ask the public, what do you want? Because we are entering a time of fiscal constraint, and hearing from the public about their priorities, what they need most right now, is going going to help us make better decisions. But in the end, we have a responsibility to our staff to ensure that they're treated fairly, and we obviously have a responsibility to ensure that basic city systems like water and sewer and all of these things are working together in a safe manner for everybody. And so we will be balancing that input with what we know about what the city needs. Those presentations have started right now and are continuing this week, and I hope folks will tune in and engage in that process so that we can really work through this challenge together.
We have participatory budgeting. It is the current budget process. People weigh in, contact their council members, and give input about priorities. As a project manager, I've spent 20 years negotiating for competing resources and limited, attention to make sure that the project sponsors are getting the project outcomes they seek. City council is no different in that regard. You've got 8 council members by district and a mayor elected at large. We're going to compete for the same limited amount of resources with all good projects, all deserving priorities, sort of lumped together into one large budget document where we all try to seek some sort of a consensus vision about how we're going to move forward together and staff our city and prioritize our resources. It is very clear what the goals are for the citizens of the city of Sacramento. People are seeking services for people experiencing homelessness, affordable housing, and public safety. Those are by and large the top 3 priorities for all of our neighbors, no matter where they live in the city.
Okay, and Phil, Lucky Bomb, this is the last question before we go to closing remarks. Small businesses and innovation drive the economy. So how does Sacramento support small business and generate innovation?
Unfortunately, I don't know that we do a great job of this. We have a reasonably robust restaurant scene and entertainment scene, and I think a lot of that work happens in spite of, not because of the work that our city and government entities do. From my point of view, a lot of what we need to do at the city of Sacramento is stay out of the way. Make sure that folks are doing stuff that's responsible and safe and smart and neighborly, but also not overloading, gold plating, all of these different projects with unnecessary requirements. An example would be the time I spent on the city's planning commission. We did an analysis of all our roads. We would have these very long, thoughtful discussions, 2-3 hours often, and at the end of which, 90% of the time, we would approve staff's recommendation without change. Maybe staff was making really good recommendations, and we didn't need to have those kinds of hearings. So we made a recommendation to streamline that process and let staff approve at the zoning administrator and director level as much as possible. And a year later, after that had been happening, we went back and looked, and sure enough, the projects that we thought were controversial were being elevated up to the planning commission, and the projects that needed the kind of review and discussion were being heard there, and the staff was approved the rest.
Katie Valenzuela.
And we are so lucky to have so many incredible local entrepreneurs in our community that have amazing ideas for what to do. But they do need our help, and they do talk to me often about the help they need. I'm really proud of some of the programs our city has created through our economic development program to really help, either through strategic investment for those one-time costs to help support things like these new entrepreneur program that Downtown Partnership does with Calling All Dreamers contest. We have these cohorts now that people are going through where they can learn from marketing experts and financial experts to really equip them with the tools. So it's one thing to have a great idea, it's another thing to know how to implement it and sustain it for the long run. And we've generated millions of dollars through the one-time assistance we got during COVID and strategically invested that in these programs and in efforts to help invest in our business districts so that they could invest in them. The proudest thing for me is the Inclusive Economic Development Program that we helped create in partnership with the ethnic chambers in smaller business areas. They hired navigators to go up to Northgate, to go down into Southside, to meet these residents and these business owners where they were, to set them up with things like email addresses, and to really help them navigate the process to access resources. And we've seen documented success through that program. I'm really hopeful we can continue that partnership in the long run.
Okay, closing statements, and you'll have 1 minute. We'll begin with you, Phil.
First of all, I want to again thank the county for opening up the chambers and Metro 14 for broadcasting this, but most of all, I want to thank the league for the tireless work they do to host these forums. If you're watching this broadcast, chances are you're already a supporter of the league, but if you're not, please consider supporting them. They do amazing work to make sure that our democracy works, and without them, I think we would not have the kind of robust conversations like this that we're having today. I'm running to make sure that Sacramento continues to be and is a destination of choice, a place that people want to come back, the place that we want to stay, we want to raise our kids want to come back and raise their kids. My goal for Sacramento is to have services for people experiencing homelessness, affordable housing, and public safety that is robust and that we can be proud about. So please consider supporting me for City Council, and I appreciate your time and attention.
Katie Valenzuela.
You know, I came into office in a wild time where we were working not only against a current of a decade of policy decisions that had been made before we got here, but a global pandemic. And I know we still have a lot of work to do, but I want to finish by talking about some of the things that we have done. We have gotten hundreds of people, thousands of people off our streets. We are finally starting to see the logjam in our shelters unclog because these big permanent supportive housing units we've championed are finally opening and people are able to move through the system. We have pushed for police accountability and back against things like the militarization of police. I have used my experience as a climate advocate to push for divestment in fossil fuels and for the creation of a public bank. All of these things we have done, we have built consensus on things that had strong opposition. And yes, sometimes we have stood our ground on issues that were simply too important that my neighborhood said was too high of a priority to back down. And I'm looking forward to continuing to do that work. We have a long way to go, but I know we're on the right track and I hope we can go there together.
Thank you. And this concludes our forum. And I want to thank both of you for running for Sacramento City Council and for being here today to answer the questions from these voters. And voters, you can find your ballot and nonpartisan voter information on these candidates and propositions at vote411.org. And you are a more informed voter if you watch this forum. So we hope you'll pass on what you've learned, and you can also pass on a recording of this forum. A YouTube link of the recording will be available on the League of Women Voters website, lwvsacramento.org, right after the ballots go out on February 5th. The election is March 5th. Thanks to the League volunteers and the wonderful team here at Sacramento Metro Cable Television for this forum.